Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Adam Greco, and I am the manager of the Search Discovery SDEC program. So if you are new to the SDEC, we are a free digital analytics education program. We cover 12 topic areas, and one of those is testing and optimization, which we're going to do a session on today. If you have any questions during the session in terms of technology or any technical problems, I will be monitoring the chat, which you can find in the Zoom chat button. If you have questions for our presenter, Julie, today during the session at any point in time, you could add them to the Q&A area of Zoom, and we will get to those questions afterwards. So thank you for joining, and now I will hand it off to Julie to take it away. Thanks so much, Julie.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the session today on Don't Gamble with Your Test Validity. Instead, learn how to incorporate test monitoring into your program. And so really quickly, a little bit about me. My name is Julie Shallman. I am an analyst here at Search Discovery, and I've been working with clients across multiple industries for over 2 years now, helping support their analytics programs and their optimization programs. And so today we will be focusing more on optimization programs. And there are a lot of different steps from when a test idea is born to when the test is analyzed and all the learnings come out of it. And the step that we want to focus on today is while that test is actually live and running. And so just in that one step of the entire test process, there are actually quite a few places where mistakes can be made while the test is live. So a big one is if you're peeking at your test and you end up calling your results before you actually reach your sample size because your lift looks great, you went over the MDE that you had set. But if you didn't reach sample size and you call it, your result is invalid. And so all your rigorous work beforehand is kind of for nothing. Another one is with analytics tracking. If you run into issues and you end up not having healthy tracking while your test is live, you lose a lot of data that you might need to even just call your winner. Another place is if you're missing data for other critical stakeholder questions around your test. And unfortunately, if you don't see that until you're doing your analysis, you can't go back and get that data. And then another one is if we don't look at kind of the wider scope and impact of what our test is doing to our site, we could actually be causing harm in another portion of our digital environment that we didn't realize until it's too late. And maybe we even rolled out the challenger that had won to production, and now we see, oh no, some harm is being done that we didn't actually see while the test was live. And so in the end, what all those things do is it really causes trust to be lost in either your test results or trust in your entire program. And so you get a lot less buy-in from important stakeholders. And so the solution that we're going to be talking about today is monitoring your test, because we run tests to help mitigate risk of instead of just making a decision and rolling it out to production. And so while the test is live, we want to actively be mitigating the risk of making that change. And we want to have our eyes open to everything that's going on. And so we know going into our analysis, we're not going to find we'll find insights, but we want to understand what happened while the test was live instead of finding out later on. And so the 4 components that we want to make sure we monitor are the statistics. That's our mathematical foundation. We really want to make sure, we have proper randomization and that all of our parameters are met. And then we have our guardrail metrics where we want to check business case things like, did form abandonment increase by over 15%? And if so, would we still want to roll this challenger out to production? The next one is operational metrics. So those are things like making sure users are properly qualifying for our test and properly being randomized. And then the last component here are stakeholder concerns. We really want to make sure we hear any of those really important questions from our stakeholders, or we look into anything they're worried about, and we acknowledge that they're being monitored. And so what this all does is it, one, ensures that our test is healthy enough to continue running to completion, and two, it helps build that trust for stakeholders into our results and program. And so where do we do the monitoring is in our analytics tool. So we want to take advantage of those visualizations in there and the fact that it's really easy to give multiple people access to the same dashboard. So we have one centralized place for the information to live. We can give everybody visibility, and it's one source of truth to really align how people are talking and viewing the test. And it's nice to then have that kind of as a historical document where everything is clearly documented and defined and all the details live in one spot. And for the rest of the presentation, for our example, we use the Adobe stack, but the approach that we'll be walking through can be applied to any tool. And so here's a screenshot in Adobe Workspace, what our template actually looks like. So this is where those 4 components of monitoring that we talked about really come to life in the tool. And so before we jump into the template, I'm going to kind of just walk through a real life example that we had from one of our own clients. So we work with a B2B software company, and a lot of their business actually happens offline. And so their website is really designed and there to help them capture new leads. So the point of the website is to get their customers to fill out a form requesting a meeting with a salesperson. And the specific team that we work with was actually in charge of a recent website redesign. And they had redesigned the site to be built with modules. And so it made the design and layout really flexible. But they also knew that they had to kind of roll out the redesign with an initial setup, but that they wanted to continue experimentation on the setup to figure out like the optimal layout to help with those form leads being submitted. And so they had also, once they launched the redesign site, they conducted this digital behavior analysis, and they found that users that were converting were also viewing product pages in their visit more than the visitors that were viewing About Us pages in their visits. And so kind of with all of that background information, our test idea was born. And so in the initial setup on their homepage, they had a module for all the About Us pages and their links. And below that, they had a module for all the product pages and the links. And the idea was that if we flipped those so that the products page or the products module was above the About Us module on the homepage, that it would drive more traffic to our product pages, and then ultimately increase how many leads we were helping generate. And so the first part, jumping into the template, it's really important to always set the stage for your stakeholders. So this is where we want to really lay out like what exactly are we going to be monitoring in this dashboard. So we try to always include an entire list of like user-friendly definitions of the exact metrics we're looking at, and we always include any thresholds that would have been decided on when planning the test throughout all those conversations of gathering, you know, what are we worried about? What do we need to look for? And what is like that tolerance of change we're willing to see? And then the other part for this section is kind of giving that 30,000 foot view, giving them the test details that are important to kind of give them the context needed for your dashboard. And then also letting them know kind of exactly where this test is running. And so in the dashboard, it's going to be your first panel, that overview panel. And it's not overly long, but it has 3 distinct sections. And so 2 of the sections are really there to help be clear what the dashboard's intent is. We have the whole part about listing out everything we're watching. So we let them know that we are monitoring statistical health. We are then also monitoring 4 main metrics that have thresholds. So we're looking at the form completion rate, we're looking at that other modules interactions, and we're looking at some metrics around homepage interaction. And then at the bottom, we let them know we're also going to be checking overall health to ensure our test is healthy. And another thing that we always include in our dashboard is kind of this purpose statement, because it's important to let your readers know that this dashboard is not going to be used to analyze your test. This isn't where we're calling a winner or digging into the differences between control and challenger. This is simply where we go while the test is live to make sure our test is valid and that our results are going to be trustworthy. And then the third part here is where we outline those test details. So we give them a description of the challenger. We let them know where on the site the test is running, our primary KPI definition, and we even give them, an expected duration, because stakeholders are going to want to know, how long is this test running? When can I get the analysis from it, etc. And then another really important call out for this section is, if you give them a link to your test plan, it's really beneficial for people that want to self-serve and dive deeper into any of your test details. So you don't have to outline every single piece here, because if they want to know more, you've given them the path to do so. So the first component we had talked about for monitoring was the statistics. And so, like we said, it's your mathematical foundation. We built the entire test on parameters and assumptions, and we need to make sure that those are being met. So we look at sample ratio mismatch, or SRM. We look at sample size, and we look at traffic volume. So sample size ratio mismatch is something we want to ensure is not happening, because if we see this type of error occurring, it's going to suggest that there are lurking variables that we did not control for. And so it's hurting the randomization of our test. And really what that means is there's going to be a bias in our results, and it's not going to allow us to conclude the true effect of our challenger on our primary KPI, because there would have been that bias introduced in how our sample was randomized between the two variations. And then of course, sample size, we have to meet that to be able to say the test can be ended, and then to run our statistical tests that we had designed to then be able to say, was challenger a winner or not? And then for traffic volume, matching the expectation. So we would have designed our test and said, we need X amount of users, and we know this section of our site gets Y amount of users per week, and therefore we estimated our test needed to run, let's say, 4 weeks long. Well, if for some reason that rate of traffic is differing from what we expected, it's really important to make sure we communicate that to stakeholders who, again, might be waiting for test results, or more importantly, maybe you're working with a team on a shared part of the site that's waiting to release new content or a new function. And if they were to do that, that would mess up your test. So if they don't know that your test is going to be running 2 weeks longer than you thought, that could be a really big problem. So we always want to monitor those things. So what it looks like here in our dashboard is it's going to be our second panel. And it's very visual, and it's not overly long, but we try to make it something you can glance at and really pick out the important pieces you need to look for. So the first one is that donut chart for looking at sample ratio mismatch. And we do this because, of course, we have set up this test to be a 50-50 split. And we want to make sure that for the total users that have come into our test, is that split like significantly off? Is there a significant difference between the number of users in each variation? Because if it was, we would need to stop the test. We would need to find out why the test isn't being delivered equally between the two, and we would have to refield this test. And so, not to get too deep into SRM and why it's so important and whatnot, but it is important to know that you need to be monitoring it, and it should be in a visual that makes it really easy to see what's going on. And then the next visual we use is for sample size. So we just use a bullet chart here where it's really easy to see. Our goal of unique visitors was over 60,000. I think it was 66,000 for the test we ran. And each week you can see that blue bar marching towards the goal. What's really important here is you can see for our example, we had estimated that our test would only take 4 weeks to run, but we didn't realize that there was actually going to be a summer slowdown in our traffic, so much so that it ended up taking a whole week and a half longer than we had estimated to actually reach sample size. But again, this in our dashboard made it really easy to see that. And then the last part of our panel here was some monitoring around the primary KPI. Now, this does not count as peaking, because you'll notice that this is not our true primary KPI of click-through rate of the product module on the homepage. So what we did was we visualized a trend of just the clicks to the module for control and for challenger, because assuming we had a perfect 50-50 split and they had the exact same denominator, we could just look at clicks to kind of get a read on how click-through rate was doing. And so what this does is, with my visual as an analyst, I could come in here and see if something dropped completely to 0 and for 2 days we had no clicks to the module, it would automatically flag to me that there's probably either an issue with people even getting to the test experience, or our tracking on the test experience is broken. And then the change in clicks and the number of clicks that Challenger is ahead is just a way to kind of keep a pulse on, how is Challenger doing? But it's also not going to allow me to call a winner early. And so the next monitoring component that we look at are those guardrail metrics. And so we have to remember that we are not running this test in isolation. We're running it like out in the wild, in production, on a live website. And just because we are trying to cause a change in our primary KPI doesn't mean we won't cause a change anywhere else on the site, right? We could have a wider effect than maybe we thought. And so we're experimenting on real customers, and we need to look at the business case of like, what does actual success look like? And so during test planning, we would have had conversations with our business or our IT team or our UX team and said, if we see this type of change in user behavior, what threshold are we comfortable with seeing, right? Because we're going to be asking customers to be making different decisions. And if we were to see too big of a drop or a rise in a certain metric, then it would warrant a conversation if our test needs to be stopped. And so there are a couple types of guardrails that you should consider when planning out which ones you need to monitor. So a big one is metrics that help protect customer experience. So we want to make sure that we aren't adding any unnecessary friction into our user journey and causing, customers to drop off at important parts in our conversion funnel or anything like that. Another one would be site performance. So say that to save time for the IT team, that a test has been designed with WYSIWYG and built with CSS code, and it's being loaded onto the page, but it ends up that it's a really heavy lift for the site, and the page load time is just tanking, and you already talked to the IT team and you're way past the threshold, then the test really should be stopped or not run if the page load time is going to be that severely affected. For situational metrics or situational guardrail metrics, really that would kind of be around your specific test, because most of the time we aren't just changing anymore the color of a CTA button. You are sometimes making fundamental changes to your website and how users might be interacting with it. So you're asking users to make different decisions, and they have to make trade-offs, right? They can only put their energy and their time in so many places on your website. And so that idea of cannibalization, did your change cause too much cannibalization on another important part of the site for it to warrant being called a true winner? And then for essential business needs. So for example, we said our site was made for those form leads to be completed. So we would always want to make sure that we're monitoring how those forms are doing. Are we negatively impacting those forms? And if so, we would call into question if the test is a winner. And then the last one is checking for any other invested team's concerns. So again, we don't want to disrupt the politics of the organization. You're on a shared website. And so sometimes there are competing priorities, and you want to make sure they feel heard and that you are watching, how that part of the site is still performing. And so these metrics and monitoring all live in our third panel here. And again, we try to keep it very visual. We break up each section with titles and headers. And for our test specifically, we had 4 guardrails. from our test plan. It was a mix of situational metrics, our big business need around the forms, and then some other teams' concerns. So we had things about cannibalization to the other module that we moved and cannibalization to the rest of the homepage, because that was actually a big stakeholder concern. We had some other teams with real estate lower on the homepage that they wanted to make sure engagement didn't drop too much. And then of course we had the business one around our lead form. And so here in the visuals, we do a lot of the trended view of control versus challenger, again, making it visually easy to see if something had a crazy spike that was persisting or a crazy drop off that just didn't seem right. We would want to go check it out on the site. And we also, because of those thresholds that were set around some of these metrics in our test plan, we use a lot of summary numbers. And in those titles, we include exactly what our threshold was, so that if I see a big red 52 on my About Us module clicks, I look at the title and I can compare to, oh, my threshold was allowing us to go to negative 55%. So we're actually okay there. So those are really good ways to make that quick and easy for users to monitor in your dashboard. And then moving on to our third monitoring component, this is around operational metrics. And so operational metrics are much more technical. They're kind of looking at, is our test being delivered properly? Is our test valid to then be analyzed? It's really around that foundation of, are we capturing all the data we need, and is the data clean and trustworthy? And so if we were to see one of these metrics tank and not do well in our monitoring, it would really call for the test to be stopped. And we should be conducting a root cause analysis to understand why the delivery was not going well, because that's going to be important for all your other tests you're running, your program. So these are really important metrics. And a call out here is, though we have cleanly made a distinction between guardrail metrics and operational metrics, the guardrail being more user behavior changes and business case and kind of the art of defining success, and operational more so being that technical side. Bad news if you see these go down because something is going wrong at a fundamental level, and usually warrants that refielding of a test. So the important part here though is, when you get into looking for which metrics you need to monitor, guardrail and operational are going to give you two lenses to look at the situation and call out what you think is important. And sometimes though, you're going to land in a gray area. You're going to think, well, this metric or this worry from a stakeholder could fall into either bucket. Don't get too wrapped up on, worrying about which one you decide it falls into. In the end, it's just most important that it's captured somewhere and that it makes it into your monitoring dashboard. Because really, monitoring dashboard, we just want to make sure things come to light before the end of your test, before it's too late, and we don't want something to come up that really puts a wrench in your analysis without you knowing it until you're deep in the analysis. And so our operational metrics are going to be our fourth and final panel in our template. Again, making it very easy to distinguish control and challenger and visual cues of how each are kind of performing. And another thing we do is, in those titles, to break up the panel, we like to word our questions that if I were to answer yes to any one of these questions, that means there's an issue. So for example, we had, is there a drastic drop in conversions on a certain device type? If I answered yes to that, say mobile, I was running this test on mobile, but there was absolutely no conversions, I would need to go investigate that. And then we had a similar one around browser types as well, and new and returning users. And so this brings us to our fourth monitoring component, which was the stakeholder concerns. And you will have noticed that stakeholder concerns don't get their own panel in the workspace because they're woven throughout the fabric of your entire test. They were brought up in test planning. They aren't an afterthought. They aren't a separate piece of what you're doing. They are very much integrated throughout the entire process, and they end up getting categorized as a guardrail metric or as an operational metric. And so they live just throughout the entire dashboard. And so to wrap it up, and in summary, monitoring is really, really a great tool to help get your organization comfortable with taking risks. Again, we're testing to mitigate risk. And sometimes people get nervous with testing. And so you're helping show them that with monitoring, we can ensure that our test is valid. We can ensure that we are understanding the true impact of our change on a user's experience. And we're also protecting the business outcomes at the same time. And so it helps highlight how testing can really be this great tool to learn and make informed decisions. Again, having this visibility into your process and really outlining just how much rigor went into your test design and the running of your test and the monitoring of your test helps build the trust in your program and your results. And it helps people buy into your entire program, which will help you expand your program to other stakeholders. If you already have this monitoring dashboard set up and you have some stakeholders that might be interested in testing, and you say, hey, we have a test that's live and you can check it out and see how it's doing and kind of see how we go about testing. And they can go in and look at this dashboard and be really excited about what you could help them do and just see exactly how your program goes. And so though monitoring can sound maybe like a lot of work, the upfront work of your process pays dividends in the end. You think about if you put a lot of rigor in your test plan, it really informs what you need to monitor. And if you're monitoring your tests, then it really informs your analysis and so on. And so on top of making sure monitoring is a part of your process, taking the time to build out one of these monitoring dashboards is a really easy way to set up monitoring to keep being used throughout your program on an ongoing basis, because your website goals probably aren't going to change that often. You might be testing some of the same primary KPIs. You might be testing in some of the same areas on your site. And so it's not like the monitoring dashboard is completely unique and brand new every test. So once you make one of these, it's very easy to templatize it, to save it, to pull one up and tweak it for your next test. And so if you invest now, it's really easy to get a lot back from it later on. And so to close this out, I've included a link to my recent blog on test monitoring dashboards. It's a lot of the same content, a lot of the same conversations. It's just a nice summary of everything we've talked about today. So feel free to use that bit.ly link to check it out. And then as always, if you ever have questions about this content, feel free to reach out. There is my email and my LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. And I did post a link to your blog post as well into the chat for everyone. So if that's an easier way, feel free to click on that link. So if you have any questions for Julie, now is a good time to put them in the Q&A area. We've already got a couple questions, so I'll start reading those out, but please feel free to add them. We've got about 10-15 minutes to go through any questions. So first question here, Julie, someone had asked, could you also highlight on measuring the baseline accurately before, in the middle, and at the end of the test? So I'm not sure.
I do think,
so go ahead.
I think measuring your baseline and accurately measuring your baseline is very important. That might be something that's actually included in your test planning, because you would have outlined kind of your evidence for why you thought running this test was a good idea. So those are kind of additional details that might actually live in that link to your test plan. But I do think that it's very important to document that and put that out. I don't know if you need to monitor your baseline necessarily in this dashboard, because if you decided how to accurately measure the baseline before, I would assume that that would become your definitions in this dashboard, and then that would be reflected in how you're looking and measuring your control and challenger.
Okay, next question is, could you expand more on how you define the size and time to test? Is there a pre-process that will give you a good pulse?
Yes, so we use actually the search discovery test calculator. I don't have the link handy, but that is a really helpful online tool to help estimate based on your baseline conversion, how much traffic you get. I believe it goes at a weekly rate. So you could say, this is how much traffic I get weekly to the part of the site I want to test. And that is kind of where we play with the parameters to understand how much sample size we need. And then based on that rate of traffic we expect is how we would back into the time estimate.
Okay, the next one is, can we calculate the test significance, competence in Adobe Analytics? Is it helpful to conclude the test results?
We always take the data out of Adobe Analytics and just run the statistical t-test outside of the tool. So I wouldn't just take my lift in my analysis, although it is important to call out, I would not be calling lift or significance from this monitoring dashboard. So we purposely we didn't have the exact primary KPI calculated. That would be done in our analysis. And then that actual t-test to say, was this a significant change, would be done again using one of those online t-test calculators.
Okay, and I also did put into the chat, I remember many years ago, I attended a session at Adobe Summit where Gila from 33 Sticks did post an actual calculated metric that she's used to do some sort of statistical significance in Workspace. So I just posted a link to her blog post as well, which is, you know, if you live and breathe in Workspace and that's something you really want to do, you can check out that post that I just put in the chat group. And then related to this, we had another question said, in addition to significance calculation, is there a way to calculate statistical power in Workspace?
I have never calculated statistical power in Workspace. Again, I've always just used Workspace to kind of get my numbers to then input into an online calculator.
Okay, and I'm scanning through quickly to see if that's also in Gila's post. I don't see it right away. Jonas had asked, ever run into any cannibalization? And if so, what were the most memorable or strange types that happened during your testing?
That is a good one. Most interesting. I don't even know if I could say off the top of my head. I definitely know we look for it a lot, but a lot of it is, like I said, kind of if they choose one site section over another. So I don't think I have any good like war stories on it yet.
Okay, no worries. It's hard. We're going to put you on the spot. Okay, next question. What is the best tool you use to calculate sample size? Does your sample size change if the assumed lift changes dramatically?
So the tool is that search discovery online test calculator that we use for test planning. Is super helpful. You can kind of put in different situations and play with it from either you put in your MDE, the lift you need to see, or you kind of put in the time limit you have and it'll give you either or, whichever one you put in, it gives you the one you didn't. That's a great tool. And then sample size changing based on lift. So I wouldn't plan a test and then change like the MDE to say, you know, what change I need to see or would expect to see, like the minimum. So I would say no, sample size would not change unless you change the design of your test on the front end.
Okay, so far we've gotten through all the questions. Last call for any questions. Otherwise, we will end early. If anyone has any more, post them in. Just while we're waiting, this session is being recorded and will be posted into the testing and optimization channel. One question just came in. What is your experience working with IT and dealing with corrupted data?
Working with IT, I do think it's important to share things like this with IT so that they can see like what their hard work, and sometimes when they may feel like you're being really picky about what you're asking them to do, like why it pays off and why it's important. Um, and then what was the second part, Adam?
Um, Dealing with corrupted data.
Dealing with corrupted data. Yeah, we see that a lot, even just for the fact if you go and QA your site, for basic tracking beforehand, sometimes you'll really run into some issues of things are misfiring, they're falsely being inflated or deflated, or even the fact of like a dimension that's not being captured accurately. If you are running a test to help you say exactly what copy they clicked on compared to control and challenger, and control has the new copy, if that's not properly picked up by the dimension, I mean, you're really hurting at the end of your test when you're trying to analyze and actually segment and filter out that data down to what you're trying to measure. So we've run into that a lot, but we do try to combat it with being really thorough on that planning and QA part before the test is launched.
Yeah, one thing that I'll add that I've seen a lot is for those companies that are doing a lot of testing, I've seen some real value in using some session replay or digital experience tools like a Decibel Insight, because what's really nice is through integrations with tools like Adobe and Google Analytics, you can actually segment to look at visits that are part of a test. And then even down to like, if there's some weird anomaly, like if there's some data issue or corruption you're thinking about, like that doesn't seem right. What's nice is you could actually go to the session replay tool and actually whittle down just to those couple sessions and then watch people using the website and maybe figure out if there's some weird thing that's happening, or maybe they're going down a road that like you never expected anyone would go down. And I've seen that a lot of people have been able to use those tools to be able to actually kind of like adjust their test if there's a problem, or fix something on the fly. Sometimes seeing something is easier than trying to like guess when you're just looking at reams of data coming in. So cool. Awesome. Well, I think we have exhausted our questions. So Julie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom here. And if anyone has any other questions, Julie's information is up on the screen. We are going to be having almost 2 sessions a week for the SDEC because we've had so much demand and so many people asking to come present. So I believe we have another one later this week, and look forward to seeing you all at a future session. But again, Julie, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.